For everyone with an interest in MASH, or more broadly steatotic liver disease, Surf's Up, Season 6, Episode 6 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami. Our episode in honor and memory of our co-founder, Stephen Harrison, on the first anniversary of his passing, starts now.
This week on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
Approval of GLP-1s is going to clearly shift the needle also in terms of awareness, because GLP-1s are most commonly used in primary care and endocrinology practices now. Having a liver-specific label come in there is special.
Probably it's not just about weight loss. Of course, weight loss is important, but there are other mechanisms also at play to explain why some of the patients, even with minor metabolic abnormalities, get important liver disease.
With more non-invasive monitoring in these studies, we can monitor more regularly the state and the dynamic condition of the liver. Alexander Cragg and his team this week have produced a great article showing that the liver is fairly dynamic in its changes.
He really was a tremendous thought leader. He had a vision of changing the entire landscape of liver disease. He wanted to make a change, a lasting change that survived him for years and years to come, and he certainly did that.
I had all these plans, and to be honest with you, Roger, I keep these plans in mind as I plan my future, and I want to continue his legacy. And I feel like it's part of my duty as a friend to Stephen to execute his vision.
For the last 5 years, MASLD stakeholders, whether manufacturers, trial sites, providers, payers, patients, or investors, have turned to Surfing the MASH Tsunami to keep track of drug and device development, epidemiology, public health initiatives, and practice patterns. This week, our episode honors our colleague and co-founder, Dr. Stephen Harrison, on the first anniversary of his passing.
Every April, we will honor Stephen's memory by holding a roundtable discussion on drug development, led by our 3 co-hosts and including some of Stephen's closest colleagues. The 2 interviews this week will include Summit Clinical Research CEO Gail Hinkson and our longtime panelist and friend, Dr. Naim Alkhouri.
This week's sponsors for Surfing MASH include
LiverRight and the LiverRight Scanning Network. On April 15th, 2025, LiverRight will open America's first virtual specialty clinic for liver disease, offering adults in all 50 states video appointments and helping GI practices and health systems triage and treat the swelling numbers of patients seeking MASLD and MASH testing. LiverRight offers same-week video visits and accepts insurance. For more information, contact LiverRight, that's liver, and then RIGHT at www.liverright.com.
Tawazin Health, your partner in global liver health innovation. At Tawazin Health, we specialize in providing small or large-scale access to FibroScan examinations for liver health-focused early detection, clinical trials, independent research, and collaborative projects with clinicians and FibroScan providers increasingly throughout the world. As industry-leading experts, we design and deliver high-quality FibroScan services because we know that accurate, high-quality, reliable data drives better outcomes. To learn about our sister lifestyle app, mylife365.me, click the Tawazin Health link on the Surfing MASH homepage.
This is a tough week for all of us in the Surfing MASH family. On April 23rd, 2024, a year ago Wednesday, our co-founder and spirit guide, Stephen Harrison, passed away fairly suddenly, leaving a huge hole in the world of steatotic liver disease, although comparable maybe in size to the dent that he put in it through the many, many things he did over the course of his life. So we're going to honor Stephen today in 3 different ways. First, our roundtable conversation for the end of April, beginning of May, focuses on drug development, Stephen's greatest passion within the MASH space, along with Naim Alkhouri, Sven, Francque, and Jörn Schattenberg and Louise. Second, we have a first ever on this podcast interview with Gail Hinkson, the CEO of Summit Clinical Research and Stephen's partner throughout all the business that he did after he left the military. And then finally, we have an interview with Naim Alkhouri talking about changes in his role, his memory of Stephen, and what he will be doing going forward to honor that memory on a practical basis. So I'm not going to say sit back and enjoy, but it's a lot to listen to and a lot to think about. You might want to take a minute and think about your own thoughts of Stephen before you listen, but it's a good listen, so thanks.
First, our roundtable discussion, part 2. Our hosts Louise, Jörn, and Roger are joined by hepatologists and key opinion leaders, Naim Alkhouri and Sven Francque. Today's discussion focuses on resmetirom and the Incretin agonist, including discussion of what we have learned about these medications in the U.S., possible timetable for and structure of approvals in the various European countries, and finally, some promising data on other incretin agonists not yet approved for MASH.
Let me shift at this point to another topic. Naim, again, if you're going to be going a little bit, resmetirom, incretin agonists, everything else. Take your pick.
Yeah, resmetirom, I mean, it's been a year now, Roger, since we started prescribing in our clinics. We would be presenting some of the real-world data at the EASL Congress. In our abstract that we submitted, we had 424 patients that we treated in our clinics, but now we're up to 650 and counting. What was striking to me is that their baseline characteristics looked almost identical to the Maestro NASH cohort in terms of their liver stiffness, the CAP score, ALT, AST, the prevalence of diabetes, the percentage of patients that were on a statin. We noticed a higher prevalence of GLP-1 receptor agonists in the real world now. So these are patients that come to us on a steady GLP-1 and we add resmetirom on top of it. So in our clinics, about 30% of diabetics are on a GLP-1, and I suspect this number will continue to rise. And then even in non-diabetics, we have about 10% on a GLP-1 for the obesity indication. Many of them, of course, have pre-diabetes. So I think this is good to show the efficacy, effectiveness, and tolerability in the real world, and more to come on this. But we have this ongoing cohort from 6 large hepatology practices where we are following these patients that we initiate resmetirom on. I think what we saw with the data from the Essence trial with the semaglutide, we're very pleased to see efficacy on fibrosis improvement in the F2, F3 population. On the other hand, that delta from placebo was only at 14.5%, which leaves a lot of room for combination therapy and neurotherapeutic agents. But I think semaglutide is likely to be FDA approved at the end of this year. Based on the data, we did not see any new safety signal in the Essence trial. The adverse events were what you would expect with the GLP-1. So I think this is going to be also a welcomed addition for these patients. And we will be able, at least in the US, to qualify many patients that get denied GLP-1 for the obesity indication. We will be able to qualify them based on the MASH indication. And as you know, GLP-1 agonists, they have pleiotropic effects and they can treat multiple medical conditions with one medication. So you can decrease the risk of polypharmacy and drug-drug interactions and help these patients on a holistic level.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. And Naim mentioned the approval of GLP-1s, which is going to clearly shift the needle also in terms of awareness, because GLP-1s are most commonly used in primary care and endocrinology practices now. Having a liver-specific label come in there is special. I can say it'll probably depend on the medical system. For example, in Germany, the 2.4 milligrams is currently not covered by the general health care insurance. And there is the possibility this is also going to hold true for the MASH indication. So it'll be very dependent on the medical system, I think, whether you can actually qualify your patients based on their insurance status for the GLP-1 treatment with the indication of liver disease. But, I think this is not last word not said, and this is probably in the making how things proceed. I'm not sure how this is going to be dealt in Belgium, if you even know yet, Sven, or...
No, we don't know. Of course, every country in Europe is slightly different, but in Belgium also all the drugs for the obesity indication are not reimbursed. They are, of course, approved, but they are not reimbursed. The diabetes indication, yes, but the obesity indication is not. And I'm curious to see how it will be for the MASH indication. No, I'm also curious to see how it will turn out with resmetirom. I hope that we have EMA news soon so that we can progress, but it will then still, even at least in Belgium, take at least 9 months before we will have it on the Belgian market. So we're quite behind the US in that regard.
Yes, so coming back to resmetirom, of course, I'll call Naim and ask him which patients I should prescribe it in, because he has all this huge amount of experience now. That should be available, I think, in the fall here in Germany. So we'll get hands-on experience then.
We will have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, Louise, any thoughts on what the UK looks like on that? Do you have any guidance on that at all?
I have no idea whether or not the MRHA will go to approval straight after the EMA, and I strongly suspect that then we will go through the entire NICE process. And if getting FibroScan across the line for direct access for primary care took 18 months to 2 years. I'm not sure how quickly we will get access to it unless there's special dispensation for those with more advanced disease, short of cirrhosis, which is not going to be approved for. Yep, school's out. I hope we're quicker than normal, but we will see, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion at EASL about that.
Okay, so move on then to the incretin agonists, starting with the GLP-1s and then going from there. We've talked a little bit about semaglutide and data in the Essence trial. You mentioned survodutide a couple of times. What do we think the horizon there will look like, and really, what's the timeline on that going to look like? I mean, what will the role of tirzepatide be, and then what will the timeline look like beyond that?
I mean, this is very exciting. Obviously, looking at incretins, we discussed GLP-1s. I think we have tirzepatide that showed also good efficacy in a phase 2b histology trial, and the anticipation is that there will be an announcement of a phase 3 program in 2025. This is my own speculations, but I suspect also that the triple agonist called retatrutide, which is a GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon, might be looked at also in a large trial. There's potential that we may witness the design of the first NIT-based clinical trial in 2025, as long as you are not targeting accelerated approval and you are willing to follow a large cohort for a long period of time and look for outcomes. I think the FDA is potentially open to the idea of designing trials based on NITs. For smaller biotechs, of course, looking for that accelerated approval, especially in the F2, F3 population based on histology, is still very important for them, so they can have the bandwidth to actually finish a phase 3 trial that costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Going back to the science, I think what is emerging is that having the glucagon piece has additional benefits in terms of liver-directed therapy and increasing the efficacy on the liver endpoints. We saw comparison between efinopegdutide, which is a dual agonist with glucagon and GLP-1, compared to semaglutide, showing clearly superior results in terms of reducing liver fat on MRI PDFF. Speaking to the direct effects of glucagon, I think Mazen has a presentation also at EASL looking at the fibrosis biomarkers in the survodutide program and showing some exciting findings that I can't share yet, but will point toward liver-directed effects of glucagon. And I think the bar is very high now in terms of how much weight loss we want to achieve with these incretins. I think we all witness, a significant impact on Novo with the release of the CagriSema data, despite actually achieving very good weight loss. It just the expectations were at 25% and they came at 22.5%, and the analysts were not happy with that. So I think this is the new bar, I guess, trying to achieve that 25% weight loss or higher, and this will put these medications at the same level as bariatric surgery, with potentially also some additional benefits. So I think a very exciting field and more to come on this for sure. And lastly, we may also see the Zalfermin program, being announced for phase 3 trial. This is an FGF21 with Novo Nordisk, but I suspect that they would look at it in combination with the GLP-1. And we have a phase 2b now looking at this combination and including Cagri also, and the results are expected this year. So very exciting developments.
Okay, for those in our audience who don't know, talk a little bit about Cagri, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's another target for weight loss. It's amylin, and it's been validated with several compounds that it can induce significant weight loss. And CagriSema is the combination of cagrilinotide and semaglutide, and they have actually several phase 3 trials reading out now with, in my mind, promising results. I think we're doing such a good job with the competition that maybe, the expectations were set too high. But I think very effective combination therapy for weight loss, and it will have other beneficial effects on metabolic syndrome.
The one thing I would want to add here, and I agree with Naim on the importance of the data, is that maybe for the liver-centric effect, we don't need a weight reduction exceeding 25 or maybe even 20%. And as you highlighted, Naim, the glucagon effect, taking a liver-centric approach might be good enough to achieve like a 15% weight loss reduction, and then fine-tuning some liver-centric mechanisms that give us benefit on liver histology and outcomes. So I agree in the obesity field, it's all about weight loss. But I think in the liver field, we might not need the most potent weight loss drug, and we might even overdo it, particularly, of course, in the patients that are more advanced, because losing of body mass, including lean body mass, is always a little bit of a concern here. That sounds in the background.
I was about to ask exactly that question, Jörn, whether in fact sarcopenia becomes a concern in these patients and whether you might be happier with the 15 to 20% weight loss.
I think the sarcopenia with weight loss is still a little bit an unresolved issue, because the way it is measured is not always straightforward, because there's of course also muscle steatosis in these people. So if it's true loss of pure muscle mass or loss of the steatosis within the muscle is not always clear, but still it's indeed a concern. And I think another element that is coming from what Naim and Jörn both have said is that probably it's not just about weight loss. Of course, weight loss is important, but there are other mechanisms also at play to explain why some of the patients, even with minor metabolic abnormalities, get important liver disease. And so if you put all these patients in one cohort, it might be that at a certain point you have a kind of plateau of your weight loss effect. And even if you have more weight loss than that, it does not necessarily result in more liver benefit, and you need something on top of that. And that's also why those data on the glucagon compound are so important, because that's in contrast to GLP-1 and GIP. There you have a direct intrahepatic effect, which is lacking with GLP-1 and GLP-1 GIP agonists.
I think I'd like to echo what the guys have been saying there, is the fact that I think with more non-invasive monitoring in these studies, we can monitor more regularly the state and the dynamic condition of the liver. Alexander Cragg and his team this week have produced a great article showing that the liver is fairly dynamic in its changes. We see that daily with people's self-rated scores in the apps and things as well. But I think with crude areas like CAP and things like that, we can see these.
In today's Newsmaker segment, Summit Clinical Research CEO Gail Hinkson joins Roger. The two discuss how Gail and Stephen came to form Pinnacle Clinical Research, and after that, Summit. Gail goes on to describe the many ways that Stephen's memory shapes business goals and strategies at Summit, as well as day-to-day life there.
And this week, in place of our usual Newsmaker interview, I have the opportunity to spend some time with Gail Hinkson, the CEO of Summit Clinical Research. Gail and I were just commiserating that it's Monday, and Mondays are always manic. How's your Monday going?
Going good. All things considered, pretty good.
Happy to hear that. So, Gail, since you've not been with us before, do all of us a favor, take a couple of minutes, walk us through your personal history, and then when you come back, I'm going to have one more question for you, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really am a research professional for all intents and purposes. I started in research about 30 years ago. I started actually in phase 1 research at a site level, but have really spent my career focused on FDA-regulated clinical trials, primarily in the drug space, also some device over the course of time. So both site level as well as sponsor level, pharmaceutical and device, in really all therapeutic areas, and really have been dedicated to more MASH and metabolic space since 2015, when the late Dr. Stephen Harrison and I started Pinnacle Clinical Research and then subsequently Summit Clinical Research together.
Mm-hmm. So we like to ask our guests to tell our audience one thing they might not guess about you. What might that be, do you think?
I think for me, that I was born and lived in Alaska for the first part of my life, and that's sort of an unusual thing and gave me a lot of great opportunity.
So where in Alaska were you?
I was in the big city, Anchorage.
Okay. Define for those who don't know how big the big city is.
It's not very big.
Yeah. I'm figuring it's what, any fifth of San Antonio, right? Or 10th of San Antonio?
I would say it's smaller. Yeah, it's quite small, but a great place to grow up. Lots of outdoor activities. It's beautiful.
And how long were you there?
Until I was 11, so pretty young.
But enough to actually have cortex memory of it and all that good stuff.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So now we're in San Antonio, right? Do me a favor. Let's go back to 2015, where you started, where you and Stephen started Pinnacle. How did that come about?
So one of the roles that I had in my career was working as the research director for a 501c3 that was dedicated to research and education with the military. And so what that meant was I was responsible for all of the industry-sponsored clinical trials that were being conducted in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. As a result of that, I came to work very closely with Dr. Stephen Harrison. He was a researcher at Brooke Army Medical Center and very focused in liver disease and MASH in particular, NASH at the time. And so we worked together very closely for 7-8 years. And we always talked about the idea of starting a research center together someday. And quite frankly, I truly didn't think it would come to fruition because Dr. Harrison was such an avid educator I thought that when his military career was at an end, he would certainly go to university and continue his education pathway, sharing his knowledge base, but that wasn't in the cards. And in 2015, he asked me to relocate from Washington State to come down to Texas and help start Pinnacle Clinical Research, and so that's what I did.
Fantastic, and you've been in Texas ever since. So you had plenty of time to get accustomed to it not being that hot before you got there.
Yeah, it's still a shock to the system. I mean, it's infinitely different than the Pacific Northwest.
I know that for a fact. Spent enough time in both places. So now take us through Pinnacle to Summit and kind of how things evolved over the next 8 or 9 years.
Well, I'd spent, up until starting Pinnacle, I'd spent the majority of my career really focused on operational excellence in research sites themselves. And so, we really wanted to build a best-in-class research center that was dedicated therapeutically to liver disease and to MASH, NASH at the time again. And when we did that, we were able to get in, find the right patients, leverage the phenotype, using the information and insights that we had. And we were really effective at enrolling patients into studies. We started to get sponsors who would ask us questions like, how are you doing this? How are you finding your patients? Can you help other sites? And that became really an impetus for starting Summit. We knew that we could maximize operational efficiencies, marry that with the power of scientific insights in the disease state, and be effective at getting studies enrolled with the right patients in compressed timelines. And so that's how we set about building Summit together.
So when did Summit actually start?
It started in 2018.
Summit's kind of an interesting business model. Can you explain a little bit exactly how that works? Also Pinnacle at the same time, but let's juxtapose the two.
So Pinnacle is a network of sites that are owned and operated by a single entity for executing clinical trials in the therapeutic area of focus. Whereas Summit is sort of a unique animal. There's really not anything quite like it. We envision ourselves as a modern day IRO, integrated research organization, where the traditional IRO model is integrating research into healthcare. We integrate all of the different players into the execution of clinical studies. So sponsor and CRO and vendors and sites and all of the pieces that make it work with high efficiency and scalability. So that's how we identify ourselves. We're not just a site network. We're certainly not just providing services, CRO services. We're really marrying high science with high operational efficiency and then leveraging that across the study.
In what ways does that make you like a CRO, since I now understand how it makes you unlike a CRO?
I mean, certainly there are elements of the work that we do at Summit that are very CRO-like, although I will say that we partner very closely with the CROs who are working in the space. We have great relationships with them, and there are some things that we do in a way that CROs are not ideally suited for. We know the sites very, very intimately that are in our network. We know how they operate, what levers they need to pull in order to be effective, and we provide them support to be able to do those effective efforts. Where a CRO is handling more of the data management and sort of the behind-the-scenes transfer of obligation pieces on behalf of the sponsor. So we're sort of like glue to where the CRO is managing data.
Okay. And how many sites are in the Summit Network now?
There are 120 sites in the Summit Network. About 90% of those are U.S.-based, but we do have sites in 8 other countries.
Now, that's as compared to Pinnacle. Let's explain to everyone what Pinnacle is.
Yeah, Pinnacle, in the simplest sense, Pinnacle was at one point in time, was one physical site of the Summit Network. It has now grown. It's about 15 sites and continues to grow, but they are a representation of the sites in the overarching Summit Network of sites.
Okay. Do all the Pinnacle sites work on every Summit project, and do Pinnacle sites work on non-Summit projects?
Yeah, great question. So we do have a relationship in our association where Pinnacle works with Summit for their MASH research exclusively. Certainly that's something that we're experts at, they're experts at, and we work really effectively together. There are other trials that Pinnacle does that are not necessarily Summit projects. So there certainly is a mix of the two, but the majority of work is really done in collaboration together.
So now let's step back to what Steven brought to the party that made it special. His special sauce had a whole bunch of ingredients, but let's see if we can pin some of them down, okay?
I think at the end of the day, he really was a tremendous thought leader. He had a vision of changing the entire landscape of liver disease. He really wanted to leave a mark, and he touched so many areas of liver disease, in particular MASH. He wanted to make a change, a lasting change that survived him for years and years to come, and he certainly did that. And that was really a major part of his contribution to Summit. Pinnacle was both a small facet of all of the things that Steven spent his career focused on. He really saw a much much bigger vision of changing healthcare in liver disease. And so for Summit, he really was that thought leader, that driver, that influencer of the field as a whole as it pertains to research, but his career extended far beyond just Summit.
I know that. And the podcast, we talk about wanting to leave a big fat dent in fatty liver disease, which is a phrase that obviously came from Stephen. Like half of the other phrases that people use that are colorful if they're talking about liver disease. And every once in a while I hear a new one. Mike Patel last month used the phrase, "You can't outrun the fork," a phrase I'd never heard before. It made complete sense immediately. So how did that passion for science translate practically, into who you look for to hire and how you work with people, and what in the culture, besides the commitment to the science?
Yeah, I think really it is a personality type. I mean, people who are certainly passionate about research, about finding solutions for new therapeutics, who like to apply thoughts to disruptive technologies and disruptive ideas to do the work that has been done for a very long time in new and different ways. Those are the types of individuals that really work well in research in general, but certainly in Summit in particular. And those are the kinds of individuals that were drawn to Dr. Harrison, to myself, and who really thrive in this area. So people who are passionate about what they do, that want to make a change and are looking for new ways to execute on that.
Can you give a couple of examples, specific things that he's brought to the space that we might not associate with Stephen?
I think everyone's kind of has a pretty good sense of things that he's done, but certainly he looked at protocol design often and would say, let's push the envelope here. I mean, in MASH research, you've got these identification of patients that's really subjected to surrogate identifiers. And, he was constantly looking at how do we refine that and find the right patients in a more effective way by using different biomarkers, different concepts, and really tried to get regulators and sponsors to think outside the box on how to design a solid protocol, but not make it impossible to enroll, that realistic for the population. He was very, very good at that. And certainly he was not unwilling to take a few chances there and say, okay, I think this is the right methodology. And he was generally right. He used all of his collective knowledge to do so. And it made a huge impact on the development of, what became the new protocol designs in the space. So, he was very good at that.
One of the things I'm mindful of, one of my favorite things when I think about him, is a willingness to go back over what didn't work and figure out why.
Absolutely.
The Davison paper that emanated from a clinical trial that didn't make sense, and it turned out that the way the pathology reads were coming in were just appallingly inconsistent, would be one of those. Do you have others?
I think for a long time, ALT was a typical marker that was used for identification of MASH patients, and Dr. Harrison really said, let's look at AST as opposed to ALT, because he really felt like it was a better indicator. And that was a mind shift. And while it may not have been wildly adopted in design of the protocol, it certainly was adopted from phenotype targeting for patients. That, I think, is a really effective way to look at patients.
So he's not with us anymore, sadly. And how does he live on there?
Oh, he's in everything we do. He was such an influential person to anyone he met, and really people who'd never met him and heard him speak or saw, the influence that he had. It was astounding. And so I think that spirit of innovation and drive, it permeates everything that Summit does. We had this collective vision of really doing research better, more effectively, and with high science, as I said before, and that is 100% rooted in everything that we do. There isn't a single day that goes by where I don't still receive calls from people or a text from somebody who says, that man changed my life, either because they were a patient or because they were, a trial site or a sponsor. He has huge impact, and certainly the people who work at Summit have a really strong desire to continue to make him proud. I can't stress that enough, that he is woven into the fabric of everything that is Summit here.
Are there any specific manifestations of that, any specific things you do or moments that are just in what you do where everybody knows that's entirely about him or what he brought to the party?
I think there's a million different elements of that. One of the things that I think we find really interesting is that he obviously was a MASH researcher, but he looked for connections in what he called the penumbra of MASH, right? Other disease states that really touch touch MASH, like obesity and hyperlipidemia and cardiovascular trials and things like that, but also a little more disparate, like Alzheimer's. So he was really interested in finding ways that we could leverage the types of things that we do in MASH research for Alzheimer's research. Obviously there's a metabolic component to that. And we really took that to heart, and we're really going after that because he would have taken us down that road. He really wanted to see that come to fruition. So that's one of the many ways that his influence is helping the evolution of the future state of Summit.
It's interesting because I'd heard that Summit was headed into Alzheimer's and couldn't make the connection at all. Most of the people who listen to this podcast are scientists. Can you describe at some level kind of where he saw the connection being?
I think it's multi-pronged. From a metabolic association, there's a metabolic impact to Alzheimer's, so that's a pretty clear connection, although not direct connection to MASH itself. But there's also scientific and operational elements to the execution of those trials. High imaging like MASH is, using biomarkers for identification. There are a lot of trial sites that are doing Alzheimer's, and maybe they're not doing it quite as effectively as they could. And so there's this element of operational efficiencies that can be gained from doing research better and following a systematic strategy. So there's a lot of both science and operational elements that fit really well with the model that we've proven in MASH.
So are there other diseases besides Alzheimer's that you're following Stephen's vision into that aren't MASH?
Other metabolic elements like obesity, certainly obesity, hyperlipidemia, some cardiovascular outcomes trials. Beyond that, there will be others, but we're pretty systematic in our approach on those, and they will continue to evolve over time. We're never going to look to be all things to all people. We really see the benefit in being highly specialized and focused, and so we're going to do that. But certainly there were a lot of areas that he wanted to go that we will eventually touch into.
Interesting. So for that reason, what are some areas that you don't ever anticipate getting into? Things that are really different.
I think in general, like oncology is probably not an area that we're ever going to go into. Now, we may touch into that with HCC. Certainly there'll be some application for that. That's very logical, but we're never going to go into other types of oncology. There are experts who do that. They do a great job at it, and that probably will never be an area of focus for us.
Okay. Scientific curiosity, scientific discipline, larger-than-life personality. Are there specific ways that you see his personality at play there?
At Summit? Oh,
yeah.
Certainly. Yeah. I think one of the most outstanding things about him, besides the scientific rigor and the insights and just being this tremendous thought leader, was he was a larger-than-life personality with a tremendous heart, and he cared for the people that he worked with and the people that he got to know, and he was a very, very positive influence on every person he came across. And that translates to everyone everywhere. It's pretty rare that you really find somebody who is so inspirational on a scientific level as well as on a humanitarian and just a personable level. And so that it really permeates with everything that we do here, and really in everyone he has ever touched, they are forever changed by his impact.
Well, I've spent the last 5 years doing this podcast because I'm an example of that, so I certainly get the point. What should we look to from Pinnacle and from Summit in the years ahead that are manifestations of the kind of things we're talking about, of Stephen's vision? Right? Alzheimer's is one we mentioned, but what else?
Another area that we are actively developing and growing out is a MedEd/MedCom division within Summit. So this is, pretty important as we've got the first drug across the finish line for MASH, making sure that the HCP community is aware of the disease state, that they're prepared for the drugs to come behind, and that they have enough information to make good decisions from a prescribing standpoint at all levels. Those are elements that we are actively looking to bring forward and support from a CME standpoint and from a knowledge share standpoint. That's a pretty significant development that we're working on.
Excellent. What else would you like to share with people that they might not know but would love to have heard?
I think for Stephen in particular, he gave his all to work every single day, right? He was all in. He used to make this statement all the time that you can either be the pig or the chicken at the breakfast table, where the chicken is just participating, but the pig is all in. He was all in every day. But I think what is most amazing to me from a human standpoint is as hard as he worked and as much as he gave, what he gave to his family, that came first. I mean, it was just tremendous. And I don't think that man ever slept. I think he was go all the time. And and it was pretty. He was a force to be reckoned with, for sure.
Yeah, I know the sleep story because I know the hours at which I got emails. Forget anybody else. He made a comment to a friend who's an insomniac that he slept very efficiently, which I thought was kind of an interesting idea.
I'm sure he had to have in order to move through. So he was go all the time. He was very much a doer, get things done.
Well, so Gail, anything else to share, or this is plenty?
I mean, I could go on and talk forever. I think everyone's got a lot of stories about Stephen and his influence in a variety of ways, and certainly from a Summit standpoint, he is and always will be a fixture in our company till the end of time. He is the backbone that is forever with us.
Okay, and if you'd like to leave it at that, we can leave it at that. Thanks for your time. It's been great getting to talk with you about this. I mean, we talked about doing this a year ago and waiting until the time was right, but this feels like the right time. Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you somewhere soon. I don't know where, but I get back to Texas from time to time. I don't usually get to San Antonio. I usually just get to Corpus, but next time maybe I'll come over. Jörn was saying he was there last month for the first time ever.
Yeah, he was here. Yeah, you're welcome anytime.
Thanks, Gail. Take care. Have a good evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Finally, this week's expert segment is with a familiar voice making a major announcement. Naim Alkhouri joins Roger to discuss his history with Stephen Harrison, and how that has led him to join Summit Clinical Research in the new role of Chief Academic Officer. Naim discusses why he joined Summit, what his new role will entail, and what he envisions for Summit and, more generally, MASH clinical trial research in the years ahead.
So in today's expert segment, we have someone who could well be an expert, although today he's part of the general discussion about Stephen Harrison on the first anniversary of his passing. Naim Alkhouri. Naim, how are you today?
I am good. Thank you for having me, Roger, and thank you for doing this, for Stephen. He was a dear friend to all of us, and I really appreciate you taking the initiative to do this.
Well, a fantastic guy and an inspiration. And as I've announced, every April from here on out, from mid-April to or early April to early May, we will spend a month talking about drug development and his memory, and take time the week of his passing to talk about things we think might be of interest to him. But first of all, do me a favor, tell all of us a little bit about your history with Stephen and why you came to find so special about him.
So I met Stephen for the first time in person. I mean, I've known about him for a long time, but I met him for the first time at EASL in Amsterdam. That was 2017. And at the time, I had just moved to San Antonio to work at the Texas Liver Institute, and I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm like, hey, Stephen, how are you? And he's like, well, I hear you moved to my town, and why didn't you join my group? I'm like, oh, sorry. Okay, well, I'm a MASH guy. I've been doing this for a few years. I admire your work, and I hope that we can become friends. And, for the first few months, I was getting busy, getting settled, but then I reached out again, and he was very generous, and, he just really helped me collaborate on a few important papers. He also was very generous with his database that he generated at the Army Hospital in San Antonio. This was the prospective study that we did to determine the prevalence of MASLD and MASH in middle-aged Americans. And then we started working with some pharma companies on certain protocols, and we became really dear friends. When I decided to leave San Antonio and move to Arizona also, one of my biggest concerns was that my academic productivity is going to plummet because I'm moving into a smaller practice, and he reassured me that we can continue our work and that I will not miss a beat. So he was really a big part of my decision moving to Arizona, and then we continued and I became more and more involved in the Summit Network as the chair for the Cirrhosis Advisory Board. And then, we got resmetirom FDA approved, and we had several conversations that year that 2024 is going to be the best year yet, and we have so much work to do. And, Stephen and his ambitions, he wanted to dominate everything. And we talked about, working with pharma companies from like initial work with animal data, taking it to phase 1 studies and doing the SAD and MAD protocols all the way to phase 3, and also generating real-world evidence after FDA approval. So we had all these plans, and to be honest with you, Roger, I keep these plans in mind as I plan my future, and I want to continue his legacy, and I feel like it's part of my duty as a friend to Stephen to execute his vision and just keep, willing to help our patients and also support the pharma sponsors so they can execute their trials successfully.
So if you had to point to one thing about Stephen that you felt made him most special, what would that be?
I would say he was a visionary. Like, he saw things before they materialized and he just executed. He was very competitive and he was very persistent. And he, when he said he was going to do something, he made sure it happened. But really, he had a vision that you can establish a network of sites that can lead with science. It wasn't just about the mechanics and the business aspects and EBITDA. It was more like, we're going to lead with science. People are going to come to us because of the expertise that we have, but we're also going to execute and we're going to deliver and they're going to see value. I think one of the most important contributions he made to the clinical trial space was kind of the pre-screening protocols that are implemented in almost every MASH phase 2-3 trial, with starting with the AST and ALT and looking at the CAP score on FibroScan and liver stiffness and coming up with I call it the Stephen Harrison formula to have, an AST above 17 or 20 for women and men, CAP more than 280 and KPA more than 8.5. And you see a variation of this formula in almost every protocol that we execute now. And I think, taking the Summit network from a few sites to now 120 sites, that was the vision. Going global also has been part of his vision. So it's been really nice to watch how he envisioned all this, but he also executed very quickly. I mean, it was within a few years that he went from one site in San Antonio to a global network.
So our listeners had the wonderful experience of getting to hear from Gail Hinkson yesterday, who they'd not met before. And it's interesting listening to you and listening to her, how not surprisingly, you talk about a lot of the same things, the commitment to science and the process of clinical trials, inquisitiveness. She was talking about transferring interest from ALT to AST and asking, well, gee, why don't we think about AST a little differently? And the growth of the trial network. So anything else you'd like to add about Stephen before we switch?
I still miss him on many days, and I wish he was still here with us. I think we would be having way more fun if he was around. And I'm very glad that you are doing this. And I think, as you said, we should do this every year because he contributed so much. And, the only thing that was the silver lining was that he actually got to see resmetirom FDA approved. That was his baby. And to be able to leave that legacy that he got the first FDA approved drug for MASH is an amazing legacy to leave behind.
The most manifest proof of the big fat dent that he left in the world of MASH.
Yeah, couldn't agree.
And you've talked about several of the others. So let's talk a little bit about steps that you're taking to walk a little more closely in Stephen's footsteps. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, I have some big announcements to make, but I am taking on the role of the Chief Academic Officer at the Summit Clinical Research Network. This is a new position within the network that will help me to continue to lead science with my good friend Mazen Noordin, who's the Chief Scientific Officer, and with Gail and the leadership at Summit. And in collaboration also with Pinnacle Research. So the idea with this role is that we want to continue to leverage the data set that we have within Summit, the baseline screening data from several pharmaceutical trials that will allow us to explore different pre-screening pathways to decrease screen failure on liver biopsy and explore the causes of screen failure in MASH clinical trials and try to come up with ideas to decrease that rate. I think screen failure rates in MASH trials have been very high historically, and anything to decrease that by 5 or 10% will go a long way to make sure that the trials are executed in a timely manner and hopefully get the drugs in the hands of patients faster. So as part of this role, I will be also working with the Center of Learning within Summit Network. The Center of Learning is focused on providing preceptorships for pharma sponsors, so for medical science liaisons and for also pharma reps and area business managers, and also market access personnel. So the idea is that we do these preceptorships. We have teams coming from the pharma companies, and we can tailor them 1 day or 2 days where we provide some didactics on MASH, MASLD, from epidemiology to diagnostics to the competitive landscape of treatment. And then the most exciting part that I don't think you can provide in a typical CME meeting is the hands-on experience experience where they all get to do fiber scans and also look at the newer machines like hepatoscope, Velicure, Hepatis, and also get to see patients with us in clinic. They get to ask them questions about their journey. They see what a hepatologist would do in a hepatology clinic in terms of the questions we asked and the labs we order and how we make decisions, how we speak to patients about starting new treatments like resmetirom and in the future also GLP-1 receptor agonists. So they've been a success, and now we want to take them nationally and internationally. And the idea is that we can offer these in any part of the United States and in certain European countries and potentially also in Asia. So that will be a big part of what I do. I will also be working with the statistics team to generate some abstracts and write papers, and we can also help sponsors with their statistical analysis, and we can provide also help with sample size calculation. And I'll also be working with the medical science team to help sponsors with protocol design and give them intelligence about the screen failure reasons in their own trial and brainstorm with them how we can execute the trial faster. So it's going to be busy for me. I'm also transitioning from Arizona Liver Health to build my Ohio site. It's called the Clinical Research Institute of Ohio, or CREO. And this site has been in existence for 3 years, but it was a small operation, and my goal now is to grow it. The reason for that is family reasons, but I'm so glad that I have the site closer to my family in Ohio. So it's going to be a big year for me, lots of changes, but this is the new role that I'll be taking at Summit, and I'm very excited.
So first of all, congratulations, my friend. I'm jealous of anybody who gets to work with Mazen, and I'm jealous of anybody who gets to work with you. So I guess I'm jealous of both of you at the same time. That's exciting. And the effort to make the people on the industry side better informed. I'm not going to say smarter. They're smart people in the first place, but better informed about exactly what goes into the trial side and patient treatment and all that. Just sounds like a way to improve the world for everybody, every stakeholder in the mazel space, I think. Yeah?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, again, we start with advisory boards. As I said, we can be looking at companies that just have some animal data and they're thinking about their first in human study. And even when they start the trial, whether it's a phase 2A, 2B, or 3, we can provide that intelligence to help them, make protocol amendments and adjustments to decrease the screen failure rate.
So I'm just thinking that's a variety of different things that you'll be working on. What else will Summit be doing at the same time to expand further? I mean, do you know? Are you aware of the more general plans as well?
Of course. I mean, I think Summit has grown to 120 sites now. We have presence in 7 countries, so it's not just the United States. We have presence in Latin America and in Europe and Asia, and we will continue to expand. And there are plans to have more international sites and more sites in the United States. I think Gail has a vision, and I want to acknowledge also her significant role in building the network with Stephen. Maybe Stephen was the visionary, but Gail was the person who led on the operations side and made sure that, that vision was executed. And she also contributed many of her own original ideas. Also, as you said, I'm very excited to work with my good friend Mazen. I'm proud of him. He joined 2.5 years ago, and he is the co-chairman of the board for both Summit and Pinnacle. And he recently sold his site, Houston Research Institute. So it is a Pinnacle site now. There's a lot of expansion that's happening on the Pinnacle side also. So Pinnacle was a network of 3 sites. That was 2.5 years ago. And now it's grown to 15 sites. And these are very productive sites that do an excellent job in the MASH space, and now expanding into other indications, including obesity, metabolic syndrome, and also Alzheimer's disease. So this is a big deal for the network. They have also a new leadership at Pinnacle. We have also some key opinion leaders that are joining the network now, and they're going to become Pinnacle sites. So stay tuned for that. But we have some exciting names that you will hear about that will become part of Pinnacle and by default part of Summit. So a lot is happening with Summit and Pinnacle. We have plans also to work with sponsors to generate real-world evidence. This is going to be very important for companies like Madrigal and Novo Nordisk and all newcomers. Also educate providers. So I talked about educating MSL MSLs and pharma reps, but also educating non-expert providers. So let's say primary care physicians, endocrinologists, GI, hepatology, APPs, anyone who is interested in expanding their knowledge in the MASH space, we will be able to provide this. And the angle we're going to take is really the hands-on experience with everything that we do, that they will have that opportunity to interact with patients and get the feeling with the non-invasive test and see the real results from real patients and see how decision-making is being done by an experienced hepatologist.
That sounds fantastic. And you'll be part of that as well? Or, I mean, I assume chief academic, when I heard the title chief academic officer, I immediately thought if anybody was learning anything, you would be a part of that process.
Yes. I mean, you know, I have a passion for education and it's really my mission in life. So it's the perfect role for me.
And an exceptional communicator too, if I may say so. I mean, someone who just really explains things quickly and clearly. And so I can't imagine a better guy doing that.
Appreciate you, my friend.
So if we look out 3 years at the footprint that you believe Summit will have at that point in time on the space, what would we see that's different than what we see today? What's in the planning that you envision the company doing? And B, how do you think it will affect the practice in ways that people might not have thought of on their own?
From the business side, you're going to see more and more sites added to the network, and we are focusing on experienced sites with, again, leaders in the field. We also have plans for international expansion, and we will also help with real-world evidence globally, not just in the United States. On the Pinnacle side, I think the vision is to be up to 30 sites within the next couple of years, and also continue to expand the therapeutic areas, so go beyond the traditional MASLD and MASH clinical trials. I think in terms of education, again, just building the center of learning and being able to provide that educational support to all the pharma sponsors, but also the diagnostic companies. This is a very important area for us because they also want to understand the competitive landscape in terms of treatments, understand how diagnostic tests can perform differently based on the mechanism of action of different drugs. So we do have big plans. We just want to be partners again in drug development, and it's the same vision that Stephen had. We want to be involved in everything, but do it in a thoughtful way, in a scientific way, and not be a me too to anyone, but actually do our own thing that adds value and collaborate with all the players in the space. I mean, as you know, we work with many CME companies. We're not here to compete with them on their CME conferences. We work also with many educational companies that do online education, and we want to continue to support this. But when I think, what I think is when it comes to hands-on experience, this is where we can actually add to the space and provide a unique opportunity for sponsors. Also working with sponsors on advisory boards, this would be a key area for me to be involved in. And we have now kind of a network of key opinion leaders in MASH, including myself, Mazen, Jörn Schattenberg. We also have experts in the alcohol space, Dr. JP Arab and Dr. Brian Lee, and we continue to build that network. So soon you'll hear some announcements about key opinion leaders in obesity and also in the Alzheimer's space and beyond. So building that network of key opinion leaders that sponsors can reach out to for advice is a key component.
So I asked Gail about this yesterday because the first time I'd heard about Alzheimer's casually before, but she mentioned it yesterday. And I asked what the connection was. How do you see the connection between Alzheimer's and the metabolic diseases?
There is a clear connection between, metabolic syndrome, obesity, and Alzheimer. And we have data even that MASH and MASLD might be an independent risk factor. The more important thing is that, trial execution and making sure that you have the right patient population, that you can give the sponsors real estimates and not exaggerate the number of people you're going to screen and randomize, and having the network of sites that are vetted, that can deliver to the sponsors, and also understanding that, the complexity of the clinical trial space in MASH, doing Alzheimer trials are also complex and they require the clinical expertise. So I think there's a lot in common between MASH and Alzheimer. We're focusing also on building the obesity capacity. I think there's a very strong pipeline in obesity, and obesity trials can be very different from, trials that want just obese individuals with the BMI above 30, and they're very easy to enroll and very competitive, and we have some angles where we can help sponsors in terms of diversity, having a diverse patient population to make sure that the trials are representative. We have also historically high retention rate that we can share with the sponsors. So this is a big deal in obesity trials. But we also have obesity trials that are complex, and they're looking at cardiovascular outcomes, and they need specific inclusion-exclusion criteria. And some of them are looking at heart failure now. So obesity trials would be the third area in addition to now MASH and Alzheimer that we're focusing on. And we realize that not all obesity trials are created equal. And I think where we can add value is in the complex obesity trial space.
That all makes sense. So in essence, a little bit of it's about advancing the science of Alzheimer's, to go back to that one first, more about advancing the rigor at which the science of Alzheimer's proved. Whereas in obesity, I think you're talking about something broader, actually advancing the science of obesity at the same time.
Yeah. And, you're absolutely right about advancing the science because, in addition to executing and helping the sponsors, we are establishing that KOL panel within the Summit network. And we want to continue to lead the same way we are leading in MASH now. I mean, it is amazing when you look at the numbers of patients that Summit contributes to global MASH trials. It's about 50%, Roger, of all the global MASH trials. It's really remarkable. And we work with almost every sponsor. So, Summit has become a must to have in any global MASH trial. And the vision is that we become also a must in every Alzheimer trial and every obesity trial. Again, especially the complex obesity ones. And again, leading by science is a key component of the mission.
Excellent. Will you be relocating to Cleveland, or will you maintain multiple residences, or where are you going to be living?
Yeah, no, I mean, for the last couple of years, I've had a house in Cleveland. I always had a condo, so I really never left Cleveland because of family reasons. But yeah, I have a house in Cleveland. I do love Arizona, so I'm going to keep my house in Phoenix. So I'll make an announcement on your show. If anyone wants to stay in Phoenix, just text me. If the house is empty, it's yours. And it has a pool. It's a nice house. So
I know at least one guy who might take you up on that. You're talking to him. That's fantastic. Okay. Anything else we want to touch on today while we're together?
No, I mean, honestly, I think we touched on so much. I don't want to overwhelm the audience. I think this is great. I announced the new move, and we talked about Stephen, and we talked about the network and Alzheimer, obesity. I think it's more than enough.
Yes, Stephen would be really proud of you guys. I mean, listen to Gail and listen to you and talked a little bit to Mazen offline. Stephen would be really proud of you guys. This is fantastic stuff you're doing.
It's all coming together in a very nice way. I think he would be very happy looking down on us and seeing that I'm working with Mazen and Gail, and I'm part of the network.
Agreed. Okay, well, thank you, my friend, and congratulations again. People don't know this, but you're on vacation this week with your kids. So I'm going to end this interview now so you can go back and spend the time with your family. But I look forward to having you again on the podcast a bunch in the future. And again, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Always appreciate you. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you as well. Bye-bye now. Normally, this is where the business report comes in, but we've talked about business at Summit this week, and business in the podcast can all wait till next week. Let's focus on Stephen. See you next week for Business Report.
And that wraps up Season 6, Episode 6 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami. On behalf of the surfers, our guests, and our sponsors, Liver Right and Tawazun Health, thanks for joining us this week.
Please join us again next week when our roundtable on drug development continues and we begin to discuss the upcoming EASL Congress.
In closing, let me say it's hard to believe it's been a year since Stephen left us. However, his work continues and, in fact, expands, powered by people who do so every day and every week in his memory. Think about Stephen if you knew him or if you heard his voice and what he meant to you. And after that, just stay safe, surf on, have an easy week, be thankful for those you love, and we'll see you again next week on the podcast. Bye-bye now.